You're watching Type 40.
It's time for Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network. Here we monitor the matrix of all that's ever happened or ever will across the Whoniverse, on and off screen. And I am Dan Hadley, Birmingham's king of the geeks, designated driver of your free-speaking, big-thinking show. All those incarnations of the Time Lord over 6 decades now. Whenever, wherever and however you started your journey with whichever Doctor, you'll get something out of each and every trip with Type 40. Okay, so the nights are very cold at the moment. Very, very chilly out as of time of recording. There's a dusting of frost appearing once more and lots of those snow warnings popping up on the smartphone. I think the safest thing to do, really, is to stay indoors. And if you can hang out with friends, it's even better. Fortunately for me, I've got Charlotte Shields here. And if she doesn't know what's on, maybe I do.
Maybe we can, between us, dig that TV guide out and find something on the TV tonight, Dan.
I have the distinct impression that the little monitor screen in the 8th Doctor's TARDIS probably only picks up about 4 or 5 channels. I think it's still analog, even in the digital age, which is suit me down to the ground. I don't mind. I don't mind admitting to you.
Yeah, I can see that with the 8th Doctor, with his frock, as it's referred to by a few people afterwards. He sort of dressed very old-fashioned, but that's one thing I quite love about his incarnation.
When it comes to Doctor Who history, the beauty of it is when we've got a bit of downtime in between eras, we can dance around through it all, can't we? And sort of cherry pick which bit of it we want to chat about at an extended period of time, I suppose. And quite often, I do find that when fans are left to their own devices, Charlotte, the 8th Doctor does tend to rear his head pretty frequently, which is extraordinary for a version of the character that's only got less than an hour and a half, hour and 3/4 on screen. I can't wait to begin talking about Paul McGann's Doctor again.
Yeah, I don't know if I've said this before in either a podcast or our live streams. McGann is like, he's that mystery, he's the Doctor that never fully was. And I think that's such an irresistible thing for us as fans to sort of think, what if, or what would we have done? Sort of, I can't think of any other Doctor that has that quality, bar McGann at this point.
There's a romance to him. As you say, he could very well be irresistible, which is also a word that I would use to sum up our mate, Gary Akers.
Well, when you're right, you're right. What can I say?
Hi, Gary. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you. Especially talking about McGann, who is, I agree with what Charlotte said, whether it's because we didn't get enough of him, or I think it's just because he's one of I put him with the classic Doctors, and he's one of the few that, like, from the first minute made an immediate, he was the Doctor. You know, you didn't need to wait for a big Doctor moment. It's just the way he carried himself and everything. It's like right from the get-go, I thought, this is the guy.
The word that they used to describe him quite often is Byron-esque. I think it's the hair, the cravat. Again, it's that sort of romanticized version, not just of who the Doctor is, but what a hero is, really. So if I'm thinking of this Doctor as being Byron-esque, how would I describe, what word would I describe Luke Walters?
Troublemaker. God, no, that could go so many ways. Jesus. The Doctor has hit adolescence, hasn't he? He's at his teenagers. He's going through puberty, and it's good luck, Grace. That's all I'm saying. Jesus, he's gun ho. He's a very handsome chap as well, Paul McGann, in this as well. Bless him.
Annoyingly handsome then and now, Luke. How have you been, mate? Welcome back.
Yeah, hello. Pretty good, pretty chill. Got a new job again. This is like the 4th one I've had since I started doing this stream. Maybe 5th, who knows? Ever busy. How's everyone else?
Just a bit chilly.
I've got my heater on. It's so warm in here. I am sweating like nothing. It's horrendous, but I'm going to persevere because Manchester's biting cold.
either too hot or too cold. We're always complaining about one thing or another. If it's not the weather that we're complaining about, it's Doctor Who, isn't it? And that's what happens whenever any Doctor Who fans get together, 2 or 3 or 4 or more. And we've got a full house this time too. Whether he's going to do his fair share of the complaining or not, I don't know. Welcome back to the show, Mr. David Milling.
Hello, Captain Kirkwave. Yes, hello. I'm not going to complain at all. I love Paul McGann, and I concur with everything you've said, and I'm particularly interested that Luke is sweating.
It's so hot. It's so hot.
I've got the radiator behind me too, so it's pumping out some much needed warmth.
This period in Doctor Who's sort of fictional history does have that mystique around it and kind of taps into all our imaginations. And most people will speak very enthusiastically about this incarnation of the character. But I have noticed that even when it's a subject that a lot of Doctor Who fans agree about, where we often find ourselves is in a place of disagreement, because sometimes we can't believe the takes one another have got, even about the material that brings us largely a lot of pleasure. It's like, well, I looked at it like this, or I looked at that character like that, or we go, what? Where? What? But to me, that's part of the joy of doing this and getting together with yourselves and our other friends. It's because you can share the takes that usually get confined to between our ears.
Yeah, and we've got so much material that features Paul McGann's Doctors, whether it be the TV movie, whether it be the novelizations from BBC Books, and the whole different sort of strands that took place there. And also we've got the wonderful audios from Big Finish, which have taken his Doctor to so many different places, divergent universes, and all round the shop. And for me, I think this is one of the most exciting portrayals of the Doctor that has just been allowed to run, and you can have a contrast of, well, I preferred the books, I preferred the audios, I preferred this, I preferred the comics.
One expression that I've never liked, Gary, is the wilderness years. It's always rubbed me up the wrong way. First of all, I think it sounds really corny. But secondly, it wasn't really the wilderness years at all. Doctor Who was never completely away. It was never out of mind. It was just out of sight for those who didn't know where to find it, or weren't invested enough, I suppose, just in the same way that David said. But whilst I don't like the term the wilderness years, I'm fully on board with Big Finish deciding that January 2026 was to be henceforth known as McGannuary. This is a riff on the vegan trend from a few years ago, isn't it, where people do veganuary, and they go vegan for the whole of the month, which that's pretty nauseating. And I say that as a vegetarian. But when I saw this McGannuary, I thought, yeah, why not? It's a little bit corny, but let's go with it. If not now, then when? Why do we have to wait until May,
I totally agree with your assessment of the so-called original wilderness years. If you look back on it, the show may not have been on television, but it was a period of just unbridled creativity. And I actually think I was a huge fan, and have always been until the last few years, a big fan of the magazine. I actually think that the so-called wilderness years was the most creative period for the magazine. The articles that they were doing, the analyses they were doing, because they weren't tied to covering what was on television. That to me was my favorite era, because I never knew what they were going to cover. I mean, I think it was a spectacular time, even though in that, what was it? So 89 through 16 years, whatever, we just had the TV movie, but still you didn't suffer from a lack of Doctor Who. You just kind of had to look around for it.
What goes around comes around, Gary. I was delighted to see that, along with the announcement that January was going to be henceforth known as McGannuary, was this announcement too that they'd be reissuing some of his earliest adventures. Whenever I think about Paul McGann and I see that I see that font, that slightly sort of old script font, and see him in his cravat again, sort of pursing his lips as he peers out of the TARDIS. I'm transported all the way back to 1996 when everybody was doing the Macarena. Everybody except me, David. I couldn't do this at all. I was there in the clubs every Friday, treading on young girls' feet and making a fool of myself. I'd get about 1.5, 2 minutes in, and then one of my mates would call me over. It's your round. Thank God for that.
Los Del Rios, I believe they are called.
Independence Day was about to blow up in the cinema. This was the big movie that year, which I'd seen the trailers. I couldn't wait for this film to open because there hadn't really been much science fiction movies for the 3 or 4 years before. They'd sort of been slowly working their way back. We'd had Stargate a couple of years earlier. Right. Independence Day looked sort of next level and unmissable. But I was even more excited about a far lower budget feature-length event, the Doctor Who TV movie, sometimes called The Enemy Within. Featuring Paul McGann, Eric Roberts, Daphne Ashbrook, and Yi Ji So. Strangely, all these years on, 30 years on, I've probably seen the TV movie considerably more times than I've ever seen Independence Day. But then again, I am a Doctor Who fan, and this is McGannuary. It's only the starting point to Paul McGann's entire legacy on Doctor Who. I think a far greater catalogue of material exists over at bigfinish.com. And so it's no surprise really that they're the ones that are putting up the bunting extra early for this incarnation of the character, along with this exciting announcement for those who may have missed it all those years ago. So Big Finish are repackaging the earliest Paul McGann adventures in the 8th Doctor and Charlotte Pollard Series 1 digital box set. It features Storm Warning, his full-length audio debut, and the 3 adventures that followed it. Now available from bigfinish.com as a digital download to own. Brings back a lot of happy memories for me during that time. Very, very exciting. And all of those stories really established the character, I suppose, as a viable incarnation in his own right, because it was the very early days of the entire Big Finish operation. It was just release 16 through to 20, something like that, all the way back in 2001, 25 years ago. So let's sort of bundle in one anniversary with another, and we can just celebrate Paul McGann's Doctor even more so as these are all being reissued. Did you buy these back in the day, Gary?
Okay, I will say that I had a friend who had a kind of specialty comic / bookstore, and I wasn't getting these like as current as you did, because obviously the lag between between getting like the BBC books or getting the audios. So I'd be always like a little behind, but whenever he tried to get them in, I was always really eager to listen, even though I was kind of a little out of sync with all of you.
The repackaging of these 4 releases and badging as a series all of their own, Charlotte, it kind of lines it up with modern sensibilities, I suppose, all these years on. When you look at the back catalogue of Big Finish releases, you just simply got no idea where to start with an individual Doctor, never mind the entire range.
Yeah, I can remember because I was very late to listening to the audios, and I had that feeling very like, God, what do I do? Like, I sort of had to look online to understand which story comes first. Right. Where should I even start with McGann? Because I did want to listen to his stuff. But the thing is that I've always liked about the McGann, especially his earlier stuff, whether it was the Charlie stuff or later on the Lucy stuff, they were almost written like a series. You could tell when they were creating them, the structure was very, let's have these as entry points for people. Let's have these as getting to know, if you weren't sure about McGann and this new companion. In this case, it's Charlie. So I think actually doing this repackaging with this material is actually a very good idea, because you can just listen to this. You don't need to have all that. You don't have to know everything that's happened in the TV movie, for example, to listen to the audio stuff. And I always feel like that was a very purposeful thing when they were writing these stories.
This is very timely, I think. And when I listened to these back then, And even now, Luke, when I'm listening to audio drama, not just Doctor Who, but any other kind of ranges that Big Finish or other companies put out, I tend to think of them as series anyway. And I sort of band them together, block them together. I think, okay, I'll listen to that batch this week or this month, and then I'll save the rest for another couple of months. So I think this is quite a good move from Big Finish.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in the same camp as Charlotte. I come into Big Finish quite late, mainly because John Carley, it's been 4 hours for anyone keeping tabs in the chat. That's how long it took me to mention him. John got me into it because obviously he's the War Doctor, and he was like, have you listened to any of my stuff after 2 years of being friends? And I was like, yes. So he begrudgingly made me listen to, and I loved him. And he is the only one I consider canon. But I also consider, because Paul McGann has been explored off screen so much, and he mentions the companions as well when he regenerates in Night of the Doctor.
Yes.
So these two are the only Doctors that are canon from Big Finish. No matter what anyone says, I do not care, and I will go to bat over that. But yeah, of course, it's great to have them reissued, and I know some of them are like Storm Warning, for example, is on Spotify. Quite a few of them on Spotify. Spare Parts on Spotify as well. So they're readily available. But to have them all out as a single defined one series collection, and the cover art is fantastic as well. It looks beautiful.
It's a brand new piece of artwork by Rafe Wallbank too. So yeah, it really is eye catching. Of course, it's not a physical copy. Sadly, you can't put this on your shelf. But maybe if enough people ask, maybe you can print off your own. I don't know. Lots of controversial comments there already. That's just the introduction. Imagine what's coming up later on. We're going to take a peek back at one specific piece of Paul McGann's earliest run as the Doctor there on audio. That's right after I remind you, if you'd like to do some real life time traveling of your own, each and every edition of Type 40, past, present, and future, is only a tap or two away on the device of your choice if you know exactly where to look. A proper back and forth catalogue of reviews, previews, interviews, geek outs, and deep dives with all our regular panelists and lots of awesome guests. Something for every fan, in fact, over at type40.podbean.com. More about that a little later, and we'll be making time as ever to cross the CVE and plug our sister and brother, cousins, and other podcasts all across the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network too. So, whether he was the Doctor you were expecting back in 1996 or 2001, and however you feel about all of that material now, let's have a treat. Let's work these controls as best we can. I'm never sure what does what on any of them, never mind this Edwardian-style, Jules Verne-inspired mahogany TARDIS console, looking back to the beginnings of the Eighth Doctor now. It was on this day, as of time of recording 30 years ago, that the Doctor Who TV movie began filming in Vancouver, Canada. The latest Time Lord was in place and well wigged up for his shot at bringing Doctor Who back as a regular series. It never went down that way, ultimately, did it? Time and Tide and all of that. But Type 40 will be celebrating not just the TV movie, but 3 decades of Paul McGann's Eighth Doctor, after all, throughout 2026. And where else would we begin than with McGannuary, as declared by Big Finish Productions? Paul McGann has recorded about 200 audio dramas with the company now over the last 25 years. A living, breathing era, you could say, with seasons and arcs and characters absolutely identified with his Doctor alone, amounting to an extraordinary contribution, a story of tenacity, of evolution and creativity, and in time, mutual affection between the actor and his fans. Doctor Who fans love the guy. They adore his Doctor, whatever they thought of the TV movie back then, and we hunger for more, especially on TV, but we're not fussy, are we? There's something about this actor in this role. It was a predictably rainy morning in Wiltshire in January 1996 when the 36-year-old actor, already a veteran of TV, film and stage, was revealed to the press by BBC Worldwide as the 8th Doctor Who. I remember it really, really well. A special press event. They were all over this, just at the point where you'd have been forgiven for thinking that the world had forgotten completely about Doctor Who. Charlotte,
Yeah, I've always feel like I've come to McGann in an odd point because I wasn't here for any of this stuff, to put it bluntly.
So when I say all that stuff, does it sound unfeasible to you? It's a likely story, Hadley. It can't have been that much of a bolt out of the blue, can it? How do you feel when you hear all this stuff recounted like that?
Well, I can understand how it could have felt such a shock to get a new doctor because of how it went down with McCoy, because of how the series sort of got disappeared off the airwaves and they didn't really, in typical BBC fashion, really explain.
You know the situation that we've been in several times now, as long as I've known you, 2 or 3 times now, where the part is vacant or about to be vacant, and it's who will be the next doctor, and there's name after name after name after name. It was exactly the same back then. But imagine if it carried on for 3, 4, 5 years, producer after producer, rumored deal after rumored deal. It gets to the point where, as long-term fans, it got to the point where we were all thinking sort of, yeah, well, wake me up when there's a press release or some sort of event. Then I'll believe it. I'll believe it when I see it, was certainly how I felt about this. And sure enough, I couldn't believe my eyes when pictures of Paul McGann, who was a very well-known actor, even then, started to appear all across the media. You know, he may have been smiling. He may have not quite looked like any doctor that we'd seen before, but he was a reassuring presence, I think, David. You know, he'd been on TV since the early 80s when I first saw him as a young actor. Do you remember this being announced?
Yeah, I was in a pub.
Of course he was. Bloody yeah.
At university, and someone was reading a copy of the newspaper, and I just sort of had a bit of a double take, and then I just went, "Excuse me, do you mind me just having a look at your newspaper, please?" And I took the newspaper and almost fell off my chair, fell off the bar stool, because
David, did you do the thing that I did because you weren't in the company of other Doctor Who fans? You tried to play it cool.
Oh yes, and that's why I nearly fell off the bar stool, because I just could not believe it. Because I think I've said it somewhere on Type 40 before, whereby every sort of 3-4 months you get in the Daily Star or the Sun or the Mirror, so and so is the new Doctor Who. David Burton is the new Doctor Who. I mean, that was even bizarre. That then, and so you know, there was stuff in the Gallifrey Guardian, as it used to be called, in Doctor Who magazine, that there might be discussions with Amblin and Steven Spielberg and Leonard Nimoy at one point was mentioned about producing Doctor Who or something.
Well, David, you mentioned David Burton there, and that was at the start. That was 1990. As the years went on, the names got wilder and wilder, and there were sometimes light entertainers or actors, like big personalities, people off British television who weren't considered to be decent actors. Yeah, rock stars, pop stars, those kind of public figures. And so there used to be a list of names, reams of names, Charlotte, and quite often Paul McGann's name would be in there. And whilst I wouldn't have called myself a Paul McGann fan, I knew who he was. So every time I saw one of these lists, I'd see Paul McGann's name and I'd think, oh, yes, if he'd do that. He'd be the name. He'd be the name that I would discount, David, because I thought he's a proper serious actor. Yeah. They're not going to let him near this, and he's not going to want to do it. And so when it was one thing when I heard it on the radio, at work. Again, I had to play it cool, let on to nobody else in the studio that I was a Doctor Who fan. I didn't believe it until I got back home, looked it up on Oracle, the teletext service, and then went and got the paper.
Yeah, it was just mad because we'd had David Bowie, Mick Jagger, Elton John will be the Doctor, and you just thought, oh yeah, right, okay. And then when I saw that picture in the newspaper, it was a sort of exceptionally double take moment. And the guy in the bar, a complete stranger, must have thought I was some kind of nut. It was before the days of the internet and that sort of rumor mill that was there. And it was genuinely, I don't believe it. They've gone and done it. He was like the monocle mutineer. He was like in Withnail and I. He's like really good.
Did it feel like such a reassurance then? Like we've said this before when Dana said, we have had this in the modern run a few times when names get thrown up. And some of them you just laugh at, don't you? You go, no, that would be no. But then some of them, they float up and you go, ooh, yes. Is that what McGann sort of felt like back then? As that, yes, they've got it right.
It was amazing because so when is this going to be out? When is this going to be out? When is this going to be out? And the excitement that it led to and the anticipation was sort of like, yeah, this guy's really good. And my God, are they going to do some good Doctor Who again? And it was just unbelievable. And I think they, Panini, who ran DWN, released a very, very small magazine promoting alongside DWN the TV film. And it was a case of, I must have read it cover to cover about 30 times. When they announced it, they did sort of like try and get some Doctor Who-y type prop for Paul McGann to hold and look at. And it was just sort of like, my God, this is real.
The idea that they dragged this really quite respected actor at the prime of his career down to Longleat House for this really quite cheesy photo shoot is very amusing. But I think it was done under sort of armed guard, Gary, at the time, because this was pretty big news. This being the British press as well, there was a lot of talk about how much money it was supposed to cost, a £5 million budget, and will be broadcast in the United States and Britain later this year. So the articles says that was where a lot of the focus was. But the nostalgia and the well of affection for Doctor Who did sort of gradually well up as well, particularly in the tabloids, who went back to a list of all the previous actors, and they trotted out all the usual sort of one-liners, bigger on the inside, Daleks can't go upstairs, all of that sort of stuff. But at this point, we hadn't heard them for quite a while, so it was actually quite refreshing to hear it all again. Did it make its way over to your side of the world?
Well, I was at the time, and for many years after, like an avid reader of the magazine. I tried to get my hands on as many fanzines as I could, like through mail order, whether it be subscription like DWB or some others. So that's how month to month I was keeping up with the developing story. And the one aspect of it that kept throwing me was the whole the name drop of like Spielberg or Universal Television or whatever, because I couldn't get my head around, wait a minute, but it's like a British thing. Why aren't, you know, the fact that there was all these kind of American elements, influences there, that's what I had trouble wrapping my head around, because I couldn't figure out how that was going to work.
Apparently that was a big drawback when they were taking it around various places, various production houses. You know, Philip Segal was sort of banging on doors for this, and he got the money, then he hadn't. It was like a tug of war, I get the impression, between various different factions. And eventually, of course, Segal would leave Amblin and sort of take it with him. But everywhere he went, Charlotte, people were they'd got their own demands. Some of them had heard of Doctor Who and some of them hadn't. And some of them, it's like, okay, I'll give you the money, but you've got to cast this person or that person. The Americans were really pushing for David Bowie, Luke. Can you believe that?
That would have been fantastic. Bowie as the Doctor, as much as Paul McGann is brilliant. A David Bowie Doctor would have been that would have sold it for me. I would have been straight in. I would have been
know what?
That's a license to print money right there.
He could have sung his own theme song. You know,
yes,
yeah, from Goblin King to Doctor Who. It's
life on Mars with the Ice Warriors. Oh, imagine that! Jeez.
But Dan is right about for years it had just been the string of all these inexplicable names. I remember at one point like Donald Sutherland was attached to it, because I remember seeing a picture of him in McCoy's hat and jumper with just Donald Sutherland's face pasted. I think Dudley Moore. Yeah. I remember reading Dudley Moore was attached to this at one point. All these
that was a different project.
Names.
He was genuinely attached for a little while as well. No pun intended. Really, it was quite a small media landscape then, Charlotte. TV and radio, basically, and the teletext services, and then the newspapers would go with it the following day. But it was a kind of, I wouldn't say a euphoria, but it was kind of, really? You had to keep going back and reading it again because it sounded serious. I think we've gotten used to the fact that not many people took Doctor Who seriously anymore.
Yeah, and I bet so much of that feeling was what you were all just talking about, the fact that it wasn't just BBC anymore. There was going to be other people involved this time. It was sort of coming out of a very insular group that were doing it during the classic run. And now America and these sort of big TV producers and all these other sort of voices were getting to have a say. And I can't help but think that must have been a bit of a double-edged sword for the fan base. You could see the excitement there and what possibilities it could allow. But then you're thinking, oh God, is somebody going to come in and mess this up? Like, we all get that protectiveness about the show when we see new voices start to come into it. So it must have felt, like I said, double-edged sword a bit.
It did. It was a strange time, Charlotte, because it was at the height of the popularity of the X-Files. And that show had a similar appeal to Doctor Who. You got the man and the woman, similar dynamic between the two lead characters, and kind of monster of the week stories. But obviously it was aimed at an older audience. You'd got that, but there were other genre shows in play as well. And I remember thinking, when this was announced, that if anything, David, that they'd kind of left it too late. The X-Files have been running 3 or 4 years. Star Trek The Next Generation had wrapped up. There was a new Star Trek show, but there were lots and lots of genre shows sort of springing up everywhere. But it seemed to me that the bubble was actually bursting, and they may have actually waited just a little bit too late to bring back Doctor Who after all. But little did I know that the whole thing was about to revolutionize, and as TV would be revolutionized with the widespread availability of sort of cable and satellite, and the distance between, I suppose, the countries of the world to that kind of idea that Gary was speaking about, whereby news and content, as we now call it, TV shows and movies, that used to take months to come from one side of the world to the other, where we could all see them, it would actually end up being next to same day and date in just a few years from this point.
Like yourself, I was a little bit worried about the fact that it wasn't exactly riding on the coattails of all the related genre programs. It was probably running after the coattails, saying, please, can I catch up? And it was just a huge surprise that it was almost from nowhere. But I was actually stunned that they hadn't sort of gone, well, the X-Files is going down well, a Stargate went down well, so let's try and get this into production sooner. Would it have made a bit of any difference? I don't know, actually. I really don't know. But it was just really pleasant to see it come when it did.
I think the big difference in getting the Americans involved, Gary, the Americans, as we say quite often in Britain, the big difference in getting the Americans involved in a big network is that when a UK TV station would announce a production, and this happens even now, they'd announce a new show, they'd tell you the cast that was attached to it, and you'd say, oh, when can we see it? Just as David said, and it'd be, 6 months, a year. What? Sometimes longer. But with this, they announced it one day, and within 2 or 3 days after that, he was over in Vancouver actually filming the thing, Gary. I mean, it was like, this is actually happening? What? And they announced Eric Roberts, Daphne Ashbrook. Right. I'd not heard of Daphne, but I'd seen her in Deep Space Nine. I'd heard of Eric Roberts, of course I had. It's like, oh, my God. How is this going to look? I couldn't possibly imagine. But knowing that new Doctor Who of some kind was official Doctor Who 2 was being filmed somewhere, even if, just like Charlotte said, I couldn't possibly imagine what it was going to be like being made in Canada / America. It was happening. It was actually happening.
You're right. The speed of it was kind of disorienting, especially coming after. And again, like for me over here, I would get my like news in like once a month chunks, you know, whether it be whatever was in the magazine or whatever it would be. And it wouldn't be like now where it's like 2 seconds after something happens, you hear about it. But in 1996, you know, this was after like half a decade of all the start and stops and all of the rumors that got some traction and then went bust. It's like coming after 5 years of getting your hopes up and then being disappointed, hopes up, disappointed. Then all of a sudden, Dan, you're right, this happens. And all of a sudden, it's not only happening, but it's happening like dominoes being knocked down, like really quickly. And it was, like I said, it was kind of disorienting because part of me was still like, wait, is this really a thing or is this another thing that's going to fall apart? You know?
Luke, the first time I saw Paul McGann in anything was a show, a drama, a comedy drama about a young trainee upstart snooker player called Give Us a Break. Back then, I had no idea that he would eventually be Doctor Who. But how old were you when this was all happening? When did you first see Paul McGann? When were you first aware?
I was 2, so for me, he's always been the Doctor. I was 2. I'm vaguely So he's always been the Doctor for me. So I'm kind of in Charlotte's camp there. With I was around physically, mentally. Probably still the same, to be honest. But yeah, no, he's always been a Doctor for me, and every time he's just such for the American. I know it's the American casting, but he's very much the quintessential ultimate British archetype to play the Doctor in that role.
Yeah.
He's almost Hugh Grant before Hugh Grant is Hugh Grant in Curse of Fatal Death. It's just screams like everything. If an American was to look at Doctor Who, then you'd want that Edwardian type figure, the locks, and I know it's a wig and everything, and I know he was originally cast because of the locks, but no, he's always been the Doctor for me. So I don't have that disconnect where there's like, oh, the casting coming up or whatever, because he has always been accessible to me. I remember in school reading an Eighth Doctor book in school. Now more prevalent, listen to the Big Finish audios. Night of the Doctor, he's rumoured to come back every 2 minutes. And the Paul McGann TV series is rumoured every month. But yeah, no, he's always been the Doctor for me. I don't think that will ever change. Even lesbian vampire killers, he's still the Doctor. So who knows?
With Horn and Corden, that wasn't it? A cheap British comedy movie from heaven knows when. It wasn't just his acting credentials up until the mid-90s that had sort of got him on Philip Seagal's radar. It was the look. And this was the only time that I ever sort of stopped. As I was flicking through the pages of the Radio Times, I saw a big picture of Paul McGann with all of his brothers in a drama called The Hanging Gale, which was like a period drama. Again, he was in a cravat with his shirt collar turned up and long hair. And I think he might have been the lead character because there was another full-page picture of him. And I remember thinking, God, he looks like Doctor Who. And it turns out that Seagal had seen exactly the same picture and thought exactly the same thing. It's not often that happens. And all these years later, as you say, there's a whole generation or two of people who, to them, Paul McGann's Doctor is as identifiable as Tom Baker's. And yet with a fraction of the screen time, reinvented, remodeled, time after time after time, reimagined, and yet still looking annoyingly young, Gary.
Yeah. I mean, all of these outfits work for him, and it's whether the green jacket or his original Edwardian. I think one of the reasons why his original look worked so well is because I think it was Luke who used the term like quintessentially British, which it was. I mean, for an audience, over here, they've been brought up on like Masterpiece Theatre and all the Edwardian dramas that the BBC put out. This fit right in. And it wasn't like a costume, you would say, for example, compared to like Colin Baker's, which was off-putting to a lot of people. This made sense to people, I think, as the Doctor, because not only it's a British tone, but it's eccentric, but it's not like, what in the world is that guy wearing? It made sense that
shit crazy.
Yeah, it made sense that such a quintessentially British character would wear something like this. And I just remembered for me, because I had not seen Withnail and I over here, but I had seen the Three Musketeers movie, which he was in.
Okay.
And I remember thinking at the time, because I like that movie, I saw it like 2 or 3 times.
Is this the one with Kiefer Sutherland in it?
Yes, and Charlie Sheen and yeah, and Tim Curry was the Cardinal. And I remember when I realized that somebody says, "Oh, he was in Three Musketeers," and when I realized it, I was like, "That guy is the Doctor, the guy who ran around going D'Artagnan," trying to. I thought that's the Doctor. It's like, oh, But again, very, fortunately, he was not playing it that way.
Yeah, I think it's so telling that McGann doesn't need a lot of screen time to hook people on his incarnation. Because when I first proper saw him, it was Night of the Doctor. I hadn't watched a TV movie at that point. I knew of him because I think 2005 they did a very good job at sort of giving the new fans like myself and sort of my generation, here's a really bite-sized history lesson. So I knew he was a Doctor, but I didn't have any connection or context. So they put that out on the 50th. And by the end of watching that, I was like, God, I wish he was in the actual anniversary episode.
Did you accept him instantly?
Yes. And I can remember the moment that I clicked and I was like, yep, there's the Doctor. And it's when he just... I can't remember the female character who it starts with, Night of the Doctor, who crash lands.
Oh, Cass, that is.
Cass. And it's that moment, as soon as he just slips into shot and sort of says, oh, it's not the one you're expecting, is it? I think a lot of that confidence that he just exudes and you go, oh, this is a guy who I want to follow, is his voice. Because even a lot of the work is the outfit, whatever version he's having. When you hear that sort of almost like an aristocrat talking, but it's not too snooty, if you know what I mean. It's still
commanding. It's commanding,
yes.
But warm.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. It's got authority. It's got that sort of age quality, but you want to listen to more of what this guy's going to say. And I just think McGann has, like I said, confidence. He exudes smart. And then what I also really loved, what I picked up after that night, for all what I've just said, I also love the fact that McGann's Doctor has got a bit of an edge. He's got a bit of ice. He can sort of, in one line, put somebody down without having to raise his hand. And I think that's a really good quality to have for the Doctor.
Night of the Doctor was probably the best bit about the 50th anniversary, and I go to bat for that. That was fantastic. And the fact it was supposed to be, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was supposed to be the pre-titles of the 50th, but it was getting leaked. So they were like, oh, bugger, oh damn,
yeah,
we'll just get it out now. And I think they released it beforehand, but they released it on Paul McGann's birthday, didn't they? I think that's was right. The release date, yeah. And he's just so good. And you could tell the way Moffat writes the Doctor is that quick. You can hear Matt Smith's Doctor when Paul McGann is like, 7 minutes, what am I going to do? Give me knitting, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh my God, it's like, you feel like, this is the Doctor.
Luke, people liked him immediately in 1996, but you were aware that this was a guy who was trying on the part the way you or I may try on some costume for a fancy dress party, or you put on a monkey suit to go to a wedding or whatever. It was 2-3 weeks of his life, something like that. Here we were, all those years later, nearly 2 decades later, and he seemed more right for the part than ever. There's a cockiness to the way that he plays the character, particularly in Night of the Doctor, and yet he's still not arrogant. He's never dislikable. That warmth is still there that Charlotte's pointed to.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's got that gravitas as well, when he decides to be a warrior, and he's like, "Get out,
Yeah.
get out!" He's holding it, and you can feel like this actually means something, and it means to the character. And it's like that's probably the best version of the Doctor we've had in a lot, probably since Eccleston, really, because Matt Smith is Matt Smith is brilliant. He's probably the best of the new Who Doctors. Capaldi's there or thereabouts, but I think that encapsulates what the Doctor is in 7 minutes, and it's like wow. And Paul McGann is what 60, pushing mid-60s now, early to mid-60s, and I reckon he could
66.
still do it. He could still mid to late 60s, and he could still do a job. I reckon he could still do a job. Give him his 6-part miniseries, the war between the Eighth Doctor and someone else. Let's have a look at that instead.
They keep bringing him back. He came back again on screen for Power of the Doctor, just a short scene between him and the 13th Doctor at the edge, wherever that was meant to be, between regenerations and incarnations, where they were all sort of hanging out. He was the one who didn't do robes, if you remember. And most recently, he was on stage performing the Stuff of Legend, again with India Fisher for Big Finish at Codigan Hall. And he was togged up in costume. That counts. That counts as a live action appearance, I believe, by the 8th Doctor. If it had got an audience and people pay to see it, then it's official as far as I'm concerned, Gary.
I will never forget the morning that I got up without any warning, sit down at my computer. Obviously, it's like, oh, there's a new Doctor Who thing going. It's like, what is this? And you sit down and it's Night of the Doctor. Yeah. I don't think I could have been more surprised if somebody would have hit me in the face with a 2x4. I was stunned. And to me, that is still my best memory of the 50th, is getting that out of the blue like it was Christmas. And it was just astonishing.
So that momentum was with you even in the States.
Oh, well, no, I mean, I loved Paul McGann. Because he was in a way the kind of the Doctor since 1996. He was the current Doctor. He wasn't on TV, but as far as all the extra media and stuff. And for me, my 8th Doctor era was the ongoing comics in the magazine, which were then later on, collected, here. And it was great because it was kind of like a TV season where they would do 7 or 8 smaller stories all connected in a big kind of season finale, which was like a 9 or 10-parter. So for 9 years, this was how I experienced the Night Doctor, because getting the audios was hit and miss. Keeping up with the books, which were all sequential, was hit and miss. And so when I had a chance to meet Paul McGann, this is what I took to have him autograph.
Nice.
When I saw him at Gallifrey. And because it was early on a Sunday morning and nobody else was up, I was able to stand there literally for about 15 to 20 minutes just talking to him because nobody else was up. And since this is how I experienced his Doctor, this is what I wanted him to sign.
I try to take it all in. I try to cover it all, David. So I obviously always bought DWM, as I still buy it now. So I got those. Any talking book that he would be on as the Doctor, whether it was narration or sort of partial narration, I'd buy that, the Earth and Beyond set. And I bought all the BBC books as well, even though I'm not a reader. I was never a particularly big reader in the 90s, even less so now. I tried to keep up with them, Did you follow the book ranges as well, specifically the 8th Doctor one?
Sporadically. Faction Paradox sort of did it for me because I just think it became a little bit too complicated. But I certainly followed the comics. I loved the comics. I still believe that the best Paul McGann and I'll get slaughtered for this, but I don't care. The best Paul McGann book was The 8 Doctors that Terence Dix did, because it for if you've not read it, it takes up directly after the TV movie, and then something happens. I'm not going to tell you, and basically Terry Dix has him revisit all his former selves to tie up really, really useful plot and irritating plot holes throughout the rest of his previous 7 incarnations. And it is an amazing book. It also introduces the new character Sam in a really wonderful way. And the best bit about that book is that I can hear Paul McGann's voice in my head as I'm reading it.
I could hear him in the comic strip as well. When I was reading them, once that Gary was just talking about, I would hear Paul McGann's voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the comic strips were amazing.
Yes.
And amazing. Before we had him join Big Finish on audio, I lived for those monthly comic strips. Yep. As I say, the books got a little bit complicated and went a bit down alleys that I wasn't too keen on, but and I think there's a lot to be read about there out there about that. But the comic strips, my goodness me, they were excellent.
Yeah, they
were first class.
I think one of the keys to the success of this multimedia approach during the what I'll call the McGann era, 96 to 2005, is because you didn't need to get everything to follow it. They were all their own separate tracks. If you wanted to follow the comics where the Doctor and his companion Izzy and just stick to that, you could. If you wanted to do the Big Finish audios with McGann and Charlie and nothing else, you could, because that was a separative track. And then later on, as Charlotte mentioned, with Lucy and the BBC titles, that was its own separate narrative track. Or the books, every form of different media you could take just by itself and just follow that, and it would all make sense, and it would all be kind of like self-contained. So, which I think was very welcoming to whoever, I think that, whether you wanted to just do the comics or just the books or just the audios, you could. And I think that was a genius, move for them handling this Doctor back then.
I kind of just worked something out inadvertently on a previous stream, because David just mentioned something and it brought back a memory. So on a previous stream, when we're talking about getting back in, when we first got into Doctor Who, and I said my first experience with Doctor Who was in 2005 with the reboot, it actually wasn't, and I think that just worked out, because I remember reading a Doctor Who book in primary school around, I thought, it must have been primary school, and it was the Crooked Worlds. And it came out around 2002-ish. So actually, my first experience of Doctor Who was a Paul McGann book, which I only now I clicked on when I just had a quick look, and I was like, oh. So I never clicked on. So so Paul McGann is technically my first Doctor, not Eccleston. So so my first experience was probably around 2002 buying the book. So I remember buying it. Yeah, so that entire podcast is a lie. That entire live stream is now a lie. Everything I've said is false.
I can't believe that would have reached you at that age in the way that the comic strips, the books, everything else was reaching the rest of us. Doctor Who was never dead. The Wilderness Years wasn't really a thing, right, I think. And with the coming of the audio dramas as well, the forecast audio dramas in 2001, then it was just taking it to the next level, because we didn't have to imagine Paul McGann's voice. We could hear it. I mean, this was relatively early in the Big Finish story, I suppose you could say, that only been putting out regular-ish Doctor Who material for a couple of years at this point. There were 16 releases in, and they only put them out in waves of 4 or 5. There was no monthly ranges, and there was certainly no plethora of titles and Doctors and ranges and series to choose from per month. It was quite a modest line that anybody could follow. When I saw the full-page advert in Doctor Who magazine declaring that not only had Paul McGann recorded some audio dramas for Big Finish, but you could pre-order them, get it in as soon as you could, I had to jump right on this, because as much as I'd enjoyed hearing the older Doctors back in those, playing those parts again, going forward, moving forward with the character was the next best thing to it being back on television, and I couldn't wait for this expansion to begin. I think I was counting the weeks for the first release, and I had a word with the people at my local branch of Forbidden Planet, Gary, saying, "Look, no, they're audio dramas. They're on CD. They're on. I spelt it out to them meticulously because there was no way I was going to miss this one, because sometimes with the earlier ones of the Doctors, they didn't get some in, or they'd forgotten to get it in, and I'd asked for it. But I was meticulous. I was meticulous about this. I was counting the months. I really was.
I could see, Dan, I could totally see you at the store with the magazine, with this ad, you taking the ad in, going, this, I want this. Where is this?
It's like going to the barbers with a picture of David Hasselhoff's haircut and saying, "I want it like that." when you're 7, it was the equivalent of doing that. They were sick of the sight of me.
Well, and
of course, I did get it eventually.
The big thing about it, as you can see from just this picture, is all of the 15 previous were just like standalones, right? But this was like the first kind of like mini series. It's like we're getting 4 connected, ongoing adventures of the Doctor. So that was a big thing.
Yeah, and I must think at Big Finish and those writers to basically be given a blank slate Doctor, because all the other Doctors had all those episodes and stuff that like, oh, you can't do that because in this episode he did this, or in this episode he said that. So to not have those constraints and to basically say, we can do, bar doing something that's really undoctor-like, we can sort of have fun. And I think that's probably why Big Finish made so much of a big deal, I think, of this, because this was them being able to write with the most freedom they probably ever had at that point.
This has been what they were gunning for. And the fact that they hadn't been able to get him before was the reason why Stephen Moffat kind of walked on the Big Finish project way back when they were looking at securing the Doctor Who license. If you remember, if they couldn't get Paul McGann, he wasn't interested, is how the story went. But get him eventually, they did. And in many respects, I think that the Big Finish range likely would have finished after a few years had they not got Paul in, Gary.
Yeah, because as good as Davison and Colin Baker and McCoy were, at that point, that was the kind of like trifecta. You had to be one of those 3. And you're right, as good as they were, you could only kind of go back to the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 so many times. This was a really necessary broadening of the potential of the line, that you could get the then current Doctor in to do new dramas.
The only drawback was that they could only get him, not Dr. Grace Holloway or Chang Lee or anything else associated, anything that was owned by Universal. They couldn't use. That was how it was, David. But at least we got the Doctor Who is all about the Doctor at the end of the day, isn't it?
Totally. And it means you can, it creates, as Charlotte mentioned earlier, a beautiful entry point, because you can have the Doctor traveling alone and then meeting up with a new companion in whatever sort of situation the writers decide. So you've got a brilliant jumping on point with a blank canvas Doctor and a blank canvas companion. So it means that almost like, oh, this has been written for me, so I can jump in and I can travel with them without having to have any previous knowledge of the books, of the comic strips. The TV movie would help a little bit, but quite a lot, I imagine. But it's just a case of, right, okay, let's strap ourselves in and see where this takes us. These adventures are for us, and we're starting from the beginning, if you see what I mean. And it's something that Big Finish have done with McGann all throughout his time, with new companions here, there, and everywhere, that we don't have to worry about where they fit into the in-between stuff that Gary mentioned. So, right, okay, so Erimems here. Well, we never saw her on Tully. So where does that fit in with Tegan, Nissa, Adric, Turlo?
They're very careful
Perry?
about it, aren't they? Opened up far more than I think certainly Paul McGann could ever have imagined. Probably Philip Siegel and certainly Matthew Jacobs as well. You know, to them it was a sort of one and done thing. It would have been nice if it had gone somewhere, but it didn't. I think that Paul McGann's Doctor, when it comes to the Big Finish range, kind of paved the way for what they would do with the War Doctor stuff there, Luke, where they would get an incarnation of the character whose history was wide open. They could take him wherever, as long as they were relatively careful as to not lose track of the things that they were creating. The same model was applied to the War Doctor as they had with the Eighth Doctor, and they're now attempting to do, as I understand, with the Fugitive Doctor and various other characters as well. So you could say that in many respects it was a proof of another kind of concept, even if they were making it up as they were going along. And I've always thought that Paul McGann's Doctor, being obviously that bit younger than they'd been up to that point, more of a classical hero figure, kind of pointed the way, signaled to anybody who would be looked to bringing it back in the 21st century that making the Doctor handsome, heroic, and youngish was okay after all. And in my view, probably informed both the 10th and the 11th Doctors, Charlotte.
Yeah, I think a lot of those early McGann audios, you can see how Russell and Moffat and then the showrunners that were to come probably did borrow, if I'm being polite, ideas. Because I also think if you listen to Blood of the Daleks, which is the first one with Lucy, that whole exchange McGann has with Lucy, it's fraught. They're arguing, like she's basically telling him, "Well, you've kidnapped me, I want to go home." Now, which modern companion does that remind you of? With McGann, because like we've all said, they've experimented so much, they've sort of changed but kept the spirit of the Doctor there, but they've just tweaked things. That it sort of shows that as long as you have that incredible lead in the role and you get this, like I said, the spirit and the morals and the coreness of the Doctor, you can sort of have fun. And that's how I sort of see McGann with, and that spirit carries on in the modern, for the good parts of the modern for me.
Yes, we're marking McGannuary here on Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, simply because we can. And there's lots more to come to later on in the show. We'll be looking back to the very beginning of the Eighth Doctor's reign on audio, that first full cast audio drama. In the meantime, though, to clean out your goals and stimulate your mind, ready for that, here's Kev to bait you away to some of those other shows across the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network. See which of these you fancy, and we'll see you back here in a couple of minutes.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blooded Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our fandom flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek and the Orville show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
And you can treat yourself or treat your other selves to a little something from a selection of merchandise over at the Fandom Podcast Network's TeePublic store. There's a link to all of that in the show notes. It all goes right back into supporting the network in its continuing mission to keep you topped up with the very best in geeky pop culture coverage, so everybody wins. The gang's all here. The panel are still here. We've been trading memories and counting the grey hairs, really, as we console ourselves. Well, some of us, in light of the fact it's been 30 years since Paul McGann was first announced as the new hopeful taking over Doctor Who. Never ultimately happened on the telly in the end, did it? But in time, the Eighth Doctor would indeed run and take his place, along with the other incarnations of the character, that the pantheon of glory, a true incarnation of Doctor Who, even if you had to close your eyes to see him. With so many memories and so many stories since, where can one start with the Eighth Doctor? I'm asked that quite a lot because a lot of people latched onto this character just the way that you did, Charlotte, back at Night of the Doctor, and even Luke with that BBC book that he read whilst he was chomping down on a rusk we heard about earlier on. It's I love Paul McGann's Doctor, but there's so much Big Finish. Where on earth do I start? Well, the truth is there are a couple of viable points of entry into his era or eras, and this time we've chosen 2001 Storm Warning by Alan Barnes. Firstly, I mean, when have you ever known Doctor Who fans to be able to resist any kind of anniversary whatsoever? And this is 25 years this month since the story was first released on CD from Big Finish with a lot of fanfare. So there's lots more nostalgia to sort of bathe ourselves in as regards that. But then, of course, there's the fact that it's just been reissued as part of that collected digital download box set too. And just in case you've never heard it, here's the synopsis of Storm Warning by Alan Barnes. It's October 1930. His Majesty's airship, the R101, sets off on her maiden voyage to the farthest flung reaches of the British Empire, carrying the brightest lights of the Imperial fleet, the hopes and dreams of a breathless nation. Thousands of feet high in the blackening sky, the crew brace themselves. When the storm breaks, their lives won't be all that's at stake. The future of the galaxy will be hanging by a thread. And there's a fantastic trailer that we can play you to, courtesy of Big Finish themselves. Check it out.
Wait for it, Doctor, wait for it. Impact. Now! Well, I misjudged that.
Raise your glasses, gentlemen. I give you the R101. The R101.
Can I afford to make a jump straight out of the vortex this four-dimensional dateline? I think I'll have to. Fingers crossed. And... bye-bye. So, where am I?
I was right, Lord Tamworth. Number 3 ballast wasn't clear. There's something else. We've received a storm warning, just minutes away. I said we should have postponed this trip.
Not an option. Besides, our rendezvous is only an hour or so away.
Rendezvous? But the midpoint in Egypt is a full day's flying from here.
Like I said, Lieutenant Colonel, our rendezvous is only an hour or so away. Now, who exactly are you, and just how do you come to be aboard my airship?
My name is Charlotte Pollard. Hold on, Doctor, wait for me.
Well, don't just stand there gawping, man. Get after her!
Look! Look!
What? Where?
Through the porthole, lit up by the lightning. There's something out there, Tamworth.
Let me see.
If I remember my Earth history correctly, the R-101 airship took to the skies for her maiden voyage to India early in October 1930.
Yes, and?
And crashed in flames in France during a storm in the early hours of the next morning.
What was that? There's something dragging itself across the outside of the ship.
Stormwalling by Alan Barnes stars Paul McGann as the Doctor, with Hilton Collins as Chief Steward Weeks, Barnaby Edwards as Rathbone, Helen Goldwyn as Triskelly, and Nicholas Pegg as Lieutenant Colonel Frayling, and Gareth Thomas, the great Gareth Thomas, the original lead of Blake Seven, plays Lord Tamworth in this, and making her debut was India Fisher as new companion Charlotte Pollard. I bought this back in the day. As I said, I was counting the weeks for its release, hearing it all over again this week as part of our McGannuary celebrations. I was transported back there all over again. It's structured in the same way the old four-parters used to be, so it feels like classic Doctor Who. There's a coziness to it. And yet when David Arnold's version of the signature tune, that kicks in, we're going somewhere, but we kind of feel like we've never gone before, Charlotte. It's distinctive, and yet it's cozy as well.
Yeah, I think it was such a good move to have their own theme song. I think it would have been so easy to just use the TV movie music or something that was clearly aping that if they couldn't get the rights to it. So like you said, it's this idea of a fresh start, a new start. And I think this story has that running all throughout it, with how they introduced Charlie, how... like you heard it in that trailer. As soon as you hear the Doctor, he's trying to do something. He's active. He's at the TARDIS. He's at the controls, and it's sort of this come along. That's the vibe this story has for me, and that's what I have a memory when I first heard it. Very much so.
I like how it starts with just a sting of the new theme tune, and then we almost get a pre-credit sequence in the way that the new series does. Luke.
Yeah, it's kind of it's very of its time in that it feels like classic Who, but it feels very modern as well. I was listening to it. I was half expecting Nick Briggs' Dalek voice to pop up every 2 minutes in my head because I'm so. It's just, but it's even the music as well. The music feels like more of a classic style music than the new boisterous Murray Gold stuff. It feels very subtle and it feels very purposeful, not bombastic in years, but yeah, it just, and it feels like he's the Doctor almost instantly. You wouldn't tell this is the first time he's coming back to audio. He just slips into the role straight away. Charlie is fantastic. Rathbone as well is a great villain as well. It's a great jumping on point for any Doctor Who fan, to be honest. It's absolutely fantastic.
There's only 5 or 6 characters. They're all really well cast and carefully considered. You could say they're archetypes. You may even say that they're cliches, but that really is all in service of the story, I suppose. And particularly if you're trying to reach people who at this point might not have tried the audios because there'd only been a dozen or so. I think it's pretty clever, and to make it as inclusive as possible, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think using the old formula as well, the old, like, I know Big Finish now do the longer episodes for like Eccleston, and they do the 3-part box sets, but I think having it structured like the classic season, it just bridges that gap ever so slightly. And to be honest, I think without Paul McGann, Big Finish wouldn't be a thing anymore. I think he's carried them as much as they've got Tom back, they've got Peter, they had Lala Ward back, they've had everyone back. But I think the person that brought them the most validity and notoriety is, and the one they pinned on, is Paul McGann, because they did have carte blanche to do what they want, and he really grew into the role as well. And you're growing with him as it goes on, and you just get that sense that he just hits the ground straight away, and he's very much the archetypal Doctor. He picks up exactly from where he left off in the TV movie, from the moment where he's in the TARDIS fighting this, and you're like, oh, and the moment he meets Charlie, and then he's the German spy, and you're like, yep, I believe this is Doctor Who.
Another thing I liked about this, that I appreciated about it as a classic fan, is that the historical event that it's sort of geared around, the R101 disaster, I suppose you could call it, actually happened. But it's not something as high profile as the Titanic that everybody would have learnt about at school. This is something, and the classic series used to do this all the time, Gary, whereby you'd watch an episode of Doctor Who to talk about some sort of event, and you'd be interested enough to go and look it up after the fact, to go and, I don't know, look it up on Wikipedia at least, or maybe even check it out at the library to see what was the reality of the disaster and of that time, and of this sort of pioneering, I suppose, mode of travel, of transporting people and resources across great distances, which did end in tragedy all the way back in 1930.
Well, I didn't know about the history of the 101 before I listened to this. I mean, obviously they do a name check for the Hindenburg. They say it's on the drawing boards at the time of this. That's one of the lines in it. But I actually think it's great that they, I know they have to do it because Charlie is an Earth companion, but I think to start this off with the Doctor interacting in history, an identifiable but little known historical event, and use that as the jumping off point was a much better way to go, rather than starting off in something in deep space on a planet that we can't picture in our heads. We can picture what an airship looks like, or we can picture what the characters in this would probably look like through watching other shows and stuff. And I think that was probably an inspired way to go. I do want to do a nod toward the theme arrangement. I actually think that, for me, tonally, it was a real callback to the kind of like low bass tones of the Hartnell version, that kind of groaning and stuff. For me, it had a lot of resonance. I was thinking about the original theme graphics when I heard this one, and I think that was a good move. Yeah.
A kind of ink blot. It's very similar to Sega Nakanola's version of the theme as well, from the Whittaker era, which was the only thing I really liked about that entire time on the show. I always thought that theme tune was fantastic and had that eeriness, and that is definitely the thing that David Arnold manages to channel. Obviously, notorious Bond fan and Bond composer David Arnold. It's Alistair Locke who does the music and the sound design for the rest of it, and you can imagine an airship. We've all seen pictures of them, but the environments, the echoes, the sounds, the metal sort of railings and things, the rattling of ladders, it's just enough.
You mentioned Charlie. Charlie, to me, is inspired that they just have her as this gung-ho Edwardian adventuress. That's how she describes herself. I'm glad that we don't get a companion with the kind of like an overcomplicated or a really sad backstory, like she's an orphan or a family member just got killed or something. It's like, no, her explorer's spirit complements McGann's Doctor. They're both now these kind of Edwardian explorers, and I think that that's great.
How refreshing is it to have a companion from back in time as well, instead of a modern era companion? It's just like, it's been done, but it's still so refreshing to hear, even though this is from 2000 and 2001-ish.
The impact that she makes immediately in this role, India Fisher, she's so breathless and youthful and energetic and believable, and you can picture her face. I mean, now we've seen dozens of pictures, if not hundreds of pictures, of India Fisher herself, and heard her voice on shows like MasterChef. She's one of those people, isn't she, who narrates shows like that. So we're more accustomed to hearing her voice, but hearing this now, it feels like magic. The kind of combination that we've had in fits and starts throughout the classic era, and that we would have on TV again when it came back. David, there's just something about those two characters played by these two actors that really, really works.
It's a perfect match. Perfect match, because Paul McGann's Doctor is bubbling with that sort of effervescence joy, and then you've got Charlie Pollard, the fearless Edwardian adventurer, who's basically trying to get away to Singapore just to meet somebody on the roof terrace, because for the hell of it. and for a drink, and it's just sort of wow.
To prove a point.
Are just to prove a point.
Like
And
every
these
woman
two
I've
are-
ever known. Sorry, Charlotte, present company accepted.
just to prove a point to some ruffian that said she couldn't do it. And,
But things like that,
it's
David,
just-
they're measurable. They're things that everybody can relate to, rather than being an impossible girl who's the key to everything. And who's, it's just a lot more. And the ultimate problem with that character is one of the Doctor's own creation. Nothing to do with her. And that's why I find it also winning.
Absolutely. And right from the moment she is introduced, you get that sense of mischievous, this sort of, damn, how do I make sure my cover's not blown? And she puts on the wrong accent. And, oh, no, oh, yeah, that's right. I've just spent too much time with my uncle in Hackney. And it's just a brilliant, brilliant portrayal of a wonderful, wonderful character. And you really believe in her. And you really believe that she and the Doctor can be great friends. And they just hit it off immediately, and she's got so much chutzpah in the story, and she's no nonsense. And you're rooting for everything that she does. She's got compassion. She's got the no nonsense stuff, and it's just sort of, I really believe in you. I really, really believe in this character. I really believe in the Doctor's character, and I really believe that you two are going to be the best of friends. And the believability factor of those two characters is what you need to make Doctor Who really, really, really good. And for me, it was a cross between what I was hearing was the old, and then it turns out to be, I feel, what the new could be. And how this could go forward in the context of 2001, and it was really exciting.
And if anything,
really
David,
exciting.
The relationship between the Doctor and Charlie is almost underwritten. It's in little moments between them and understanding that they come to. So, as broad as everything else is, you've got the Rathbone with his thick foreign accent, and you've got the bellowing Lord Tamworth played with great ferocity by Gareth Thomas. They're really big and broad characters, but because the Doctor and Charlie are very well considered and conceived characters, there's lots of moments of quiet between them, Charlotte. The whole thing doesn't feel like a panto because you've got the two contrasts.
Yeah, the word I associate with Charlie throughout her run is courage. Because I think it's so hard to write that authentically with a character that it doesn't come across as she's either trying too hard or things are just being given to her. No, she has to fight. She has to prove, like you said, herself. Like with her family, there's little hints of that in this, but obviously the more they do stories, the more that get expanded. But even here, you get that hint of she feels a bit trapped by her family or her whatever her life situation is, and she just wants to take a step away and to prove, like you said. But with her being from the time period, that wasn't easy, to put it bluntly. So like I said, it's courage, it's bravery, and I think that's what McGann or this Doctor sees a lot in her, and that's what some of the interest is. And then just to add to what you said about those broad characters and what you were saying before, I also love that this isn't an alien planet story, that this isn't, oh, let's have him with Daleks, his first episode. Oh, it's nothing like that. Because you've got a very small group of characters in like a pressure cooker situation of this almost, we're going to crash. And you can see them sort of slowly start to like bicker and fight and get paranoid, and I just think that's such a good backdrop for characters and to develop both Charlie and the Doctor, because they're having to deal with these people and they can't just walk away from them. They're all in this situation together, and I think that's a really great strength of this story.
I mean, obviously India Fisher does sound like she's going at this material really sinking her teeth into it and the character for all that it's worth. I wouldn't say it was the part of a lifetime, probably not. I would imagine that trying to sell an actor or actress on this range, it's like, well, who is going to hear this? Who's going to buy these? They're not on the radio, so people have to order them on a CD. It must have been a strange sell at the time, but Doctor Who is Doctor Who, and so India Fisher sounds very up for it. And Paul McGann sounds really hungry as well, as if it was sort of unfinished business of some kind. It's like he was never away.
I love the fact that they continue on with his like high energy throughout this entire story that we got in the TV movie. They take advantage of the fact that he has like the best doctor voice outside of Tom Baker. They give him lots of speeches in this, whether he's by himself at the beginning or during I think it's the third episode, which is mostly like exposition and backstory about how they met the aliens and all of that. They gave him plenty of time to talk. They kind of give him the tendency to be like a name dropper, kind of like the Fourth Doctor was.
That's picked up from the TV movie, though, I think, isn't it?
And they make him a physical doctor too. He steps up and he punches the guy at the end. So they are like already cementing a lot of what's going to make his Doctor great.
The plot's quite nailed down, Gary. It's very, very tight, but the character is allowed sort of full range to be kind of all over the place and for stuff to happen and to bring the energy.
And I think that one of the important things they give him, he's not just the high energy, hey, let's go do this, because at the end he's very torn in his identity as a Time Lord and guardian of what he calls the web of time, about what to do with Charlie at the end. It's like, wow, there needs to be like one extra person. Should I put her back on there? That's dark stuff. The
people I know, Gary, the people I know who are resistant to the idea of Doctor Who on audio always mention, when characters are talking to themselves and things. And there's a lot of that in this. There probably is a little too much. Come to think of it, a little too much. But in moments like that, with the darkness, it works really, really well. And I think with this format, if we accept that, look, we're not watching it on the television. Take it when characters appear on television and they do that, it does break the spell. But with audio, it doesn't. It is a different medium. It's the same but different. And so why not embrace the things that you can do in audio convincingly and take advantage of the intimacy of having the actors' voices next to inside your head when you've got your headphones on or your earbuds in or something like that.
That's a great thing about audio, because so much of it, they help us conjure certain of the stuff, like the descriptions of the airship or the big bags of hydrogen and the storm outside, whatever. That takes us part of the way, but the rest is left to us to conjure in our imaginations about what the characters look like based on what they sound like. Like, for example, the I can't think of his name now, the really squirrely, weaselly guy who was Rathbone. I could see Milton Johns playing a character like that, the weaselly type of semi-traitorous guy. But whenever we're left to conjure up those images in our heads, that draws us into the story, because we're having to, we're not sitting being fed everything. We're working to kind of conjure up, I wonder what he looks like. Wow.
Well, that's where Alan Barnes and Gary Russell, everybody else involved are very careful in the things that they tell us about the environments and the slightly more outlandish aspects, the sci-fi angles to this story, because there are alien beings in this, the whole nature of the Triskeli, and that, I suppose you could say, that sort of ecosystem that they exist in and how they travel. All of that is very much left to our imaginations, David. And so I was imagining sort of how the Doctor and the other humans were making their way through the alien craft, how the R101 was passing through the alien ship, and how the female sounding, the alien played by Helen Goldwyn, that gradually sort of returns to health. When Charlie says, "Oh, she's walking, but her feet aren't touching the ground," and little descriptions like that, and you can play with the rest as a listener in your imagination.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely, and I call it the trippy bit in the story, because suddenly they're on the airship and then they go into the whoa, this is a bit weird where we're going into, and I loved that bit, and I forgot completely that was in the story, and when we're going into the trippy bit of the alien spacecraft, I'm going, wow, this is really good, and I can actually picture this all in my head because of that very subliminal, if you like, descriptive language that's being used.
Had you come across this one before, David? Had you heard this before?
Yeah, I bought it when it came out, but the thing is, I've not listened to it for 25 years, and when I listened to it again, I just sort of thought, oh yeah, I remember now, and it was. But the thing is, I was still shocked when they went to the alien spaceship, and I do love the way when it was described as sort of Dr. The. Hello, Dr. The. Yeah. And his name was reversed. And I did so enjoy that. I think Rathbones, that Barnaby Edwards needs to work on his Afrikaans accent, to be fair. But I did enjoy this story. If anything, I thought that the time on the alien spaceship was too short. I would have liked it to have been longer to get more of a description of how things were. But I thought it was the language that they used to describe their surroundings, married with the sound effects and the Foley, was just out of this world. And it was perfect on audio. And I had no problem visualizing what was going on whatsoever. Just an amazing use of dialogue, descriptive terminology, sound, and sound effect as well. I don't just brilliant.
Well, I don't like knocking Big Finish because I do still buy what I can, what piques my interest, shall I say, and I think that they are capable of a lot of innovation now. But with hindsight, I think that a lot of their output has got unnecessarily complicated, and all of those areas that you just described are too much Foley, concepts that are simply too complicated or broad, too much mumbo jumbo, and a plethora of characters who they fixate on tiny human details about. Usually their sexual orientation or something like that, something that's completely unimportant in an adventure story. None of that is present in this. It's proper high adventure in the classic sense, and yet it does feel like it is pointing gently to the future of the TV show, and therefore the brand. I remember I've listened to this about 3 or 4 times, and I always enjoy it every single time. And yet there are no returning villains, Charlotte. There's none of those sort of big ticket kind of bits of. I mean, I suppose you could say that casting Gareth Thomas, you could class that as stunt casting for a sci-fi audience, because people loved that man as Roger Blake in Blake 7, sci-fi royalty. But you couldn't get 2 more different characters than that character and Lord Tamworth in this, who sort of, he's got his own arc, I suppose you could say. And another thing about this is that I always forget where the story ends up, Luke. Even though I've heard it 3 or 4 times, there are elements to it that I forget, I suppose. Think, oh, that's clever, or it affects me. That the story of Lord Tamworth is the one that affected me the most. We hear him having a fist fight with one of these aliens, and then he makes a decision, doesn't he, towards the latter part of the story, to take his life in a completely different direction.
And that's the beauty of Big Finish, that you can do that with these characters, and they're afforded the time to, as I said, this is the classic serial format, and you allow characters a room to grow and room to breathe, and it's like That's potentially that's why Doctor Who should go back to this type of format, 4 parts, 4 stories. And look, we all loved it. It was very consumable. It's what was about an hour and a half in total, the entire story.
Yeah.
And every character has time to shine. Rathbone's accent is hilarious at times. But when you meet Charlie and she's like, "Oh, I want to go to Singapore for a Singapore sling on top of the Hilton," and it's like, "Oh, that's cool. That's cool." And Paul McGann you can see like his Doctor's trying to still find himself, and yeah, it just feels like it felt like classic Who, and going back to the BBC's old motto was to educate, entertain, and learn, or whatever it was. But how they used to treat historicals, and everyone heard of the Hindenburg disaster. How many people, and the Hindenburg is mentioned in this.
Yeah.
So how many people know about this one? So this is by virtue of how it is. This is doing the old classic BBC remit of going back and educating people about it. And I think it's a fantastic story. I think it's very well written. A lot of these Big Finish stories, I listen to them and I'm like, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. This time period is so good because, as Gary mentioned, there's so much creativity and the wilderness years. Doctor Who's probably more alive then than it has been ever.
Yep.
It was just over a decade since the TV series had disappeared when this was recorded. It was recorded in the year 2000. And so judging it based on that, on what their idea of that which Doctor Who could be, had been, and potentially could be, and the brand of Doctor Who that the listener, the customer, more to the point, as a worthwhile use of their money, justification of spending their money on, is really well judged here. The story's big. It's not something I can imagine having been done on a BBC budget, for example, back in 87, 88, when the show was taken off. I think they'd have struggled to realise the airship and various things in this. But, and this is the clever part, I don't think it's too big for where genre TV was, even in Britain, in the mid to late 90s. So it feels completely feasible that Doctor Who of that period, the Doctor Who TV series that starred Paul McGann, that we never got, there's no reason why that couldn't have told this kind of story in a measured, carefully budgeted way. And that's why it fits.
You'd have to restructure it a little bit because, as I said before, the third episode, which granted they give extra time to, the first 2 episodes are 25 minutes, just like a TV story. Episode 3 is like 35 minutes, so they give that time, and I think the 4th episode is half an hour. But even with that, the 3rd episode is where you get all of the backstory, all the exposition about the initial encounter with the aliens and what they want, and the structure of the Triskelion stuff. And so I'm not sure you could spend 35 minutes just on TV with people like talking and explaining all that. But I mean, as like a TV movie where you could kind of like move things around and fit, it absolutely work. And I also want to add, I think one of the reasons why this works so well as the debut 8th Doctor story, because they got Alan Barnes to write it. And at that point, he was the writer for the first 2 years of 2+ years of the McGann stories in the magazine, the comic series. And he had written some great stuff already by then. So he was already well familiar with the 8th Doctor's voice, which is why I think he comes off so well in this.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree, because there is somebody with knowledge of the 8th Doctor's character, and we're in from the start. Bang, this is the Doctor.
I think it was such a good idea not to do like the historical of let's get a famous figure and let's pair the famous figure off with the Doctor. Because I think at times you can get a bit boxed in if you're so focused on exploring like a Shakespeare or a Charles Dickens like the modern run did. But if you pick an event, you've got a broader sort of scope and canvas then to say, this is the historical period. We can have lots of different characters that show you aspects of that, show you this sort of the excitement and how this was new technology at the time to have these blimps and sort of all the hopes that there was. We know what's going to happen because of, but in the story, it's not happened yet. So we've got that sort of inside track. So that's also the fun of picking a time period versus a person, which I think was also a really good choice here.
Because you've got no real famous historical figures. You've got old characters who've got that old-fashioned characters, sorry, from the time period, who've got that sort of believability, like Robert Holmes used to write, for example, Jago and Lightfoot in the Tales of Wen Chang. And it is immensely believable. You believe in all the characters, and it is really clever writing that we've not, we get name-checked Lenin, Arthur Conan Doyle. They get name-checked.
Ramsay MacDonald.
Yeah, but they're not featured, which is a godsend. It's just normal people.
The dilemma at the end when it's like, oh, there's supposed to be one more body in this, and there's like it's supposed to be Charlie. She's supposed to die on the ship, and it's just adding that extra layer to him that that does get touched upon more in like the classic series we do, not the classic, the new series we do see it, but to put that into this quite bubbly, quite energetic young doctor, just to give him that little bit of a, ooh, okay, he's got a little bit of an edge. Like he knows what he's doing right, and then he just gets swept up because of her energy. He's like, "Yep, come on, I'll come with you." And he's like, "Yeah, cool, okay, let's go." It's brilliant. It's a fantastic story.
A doctor we hardly knew as well, and yet we're with him, aren't we? Right away.
Right there, Dan, I think is probably one of the reasons why, even with the absence of him on television, why he was so immediately embraced across the board by most fans, because they saw not only that he was instantly the doctor, but all of his potential to be like just one of the best doctors of all. And that's why even to this day, when fans see him just for a minute, because they know it's like, that's the doctor.
It was so needed at the time, because even though we were 15 or so adventures into the Big Finish audios, I'm gonna be controversial now and say it was still already starting to get a little bit tired, and then in comes Paul McGann with Storm Warning, and it's sort of like, right, I get it. This is how it's meant to be.
I know what you're saying. It was pleasant, wasn't it? And some of the stories were more challenging than others. But I know what you mean. Yeah. There was that feeling of, I find it difficult to understand. Stephen Moffat walking out of that production meeting with Big Finish, a little bit rude. But to be honest, I can see where it was coming from, because it doesn't really feel like this range matters until McGann joins the lineup.
Well, the show has to keep moving forward. Whether you like a certain incarnation or not, there always has to be that forward movement. And as we said before, as good as some of the individual stories were, there's only so many times you can go back to the well of, okay, this story takes place between Time Flight and Arc of Infinity. This story takes place between the two Doctors and Time Lash, or this story takes place, after Delton. But you can't, there's only so long you can drag out the whole fill in the gaps aspect of a lot of Big Finish. That had a limited shelf life if they were just going to be doing that.
I'm not going to ask you to score this out of 5, because I think it's a different format, different medium. It's sort of beside the point, isn't it? But I am going to ask you, if you enjoyed it or not. Would you go back and listen to some more? Has it reawakened something in you at all, or how's this left you going back to it for McGannuary like this there, Gary?
I could listen to McGann all day. Like I said, I mean, I know it's cliche. I could pull down a cereal box and have him read the ingredients, and I'd be fine if it was McGann's voice doing it. And especially because over time it does take on, you want eventually to see McGann face the Cybermen or meet the Brig or whatever, because then this is a great standalone adventure, but then the urge to kind of have him meet the old standbys like the Brig or the Cyberman or whatever. You want to see that. So yeah, no, I could absolutely listen to all of this all over again.
Yes, so Storm Warning is currently available as a digital download at bigfinish.com, price just £3.99, or is streaming for free, just as Luke said, over on Spotify. Link to that is in the show notes. Doctor Who, the Eighth Doctor and Charlotte Pollard Series 1, that's been released too this very month. It features Storm Warning and the 3 adventures that follow it, now available from the Big Finish website as a digital download to own. There's the gurgling and the rumbling, calling time on another conversation. But there's more on the way soon enough. Look out for that, wherever it was you found this. Maybe our dedicated home feed, that's type40.podbean.com. We're across all major podcatchers, Spotify, Audible, Amazon Music, Apple, all those places, and lots more. See us as well as hear us on our YouTube and Rumble channels with enhanced video editions of every show. And there's exclusive extra videos and live streams too. Not forgetting our mothership, the Fandom Podcast Network's master feed. Please consider a trip sideways in time there for more quality, practically daily shows from the FPN. Make contact through our social medias. Have your say on all of this and that. Instagram and X at Type40 Doctor Who. Email us, type40doctorwho@outlook.com. And there's still the Type40 Facebook group too. Of course there is. Thousands of other Doctor Who fans from all over the world, maybe a few other worlds too. Rants and raves, discussions and debates, issues of the moment or the ongoing storms. It's all on the wall there at the Type40 Facebook group. Get stuck in with fellow fans and companions. Oh, it's always nice to get back to the TARDIS and put your feet up. He's got a poof. He's got a side table. He's got candles. He's got books. He's got cups of tea and assorted rugs, soft furnishings. What else could anybody want to sink into and decide which audio they're going to listen to next?
If people want to know more about the TV movie, have a look at the documentary, Doctor Who Am I, which explores... Yeah, have a look at that as well. It just explores the writer's name. I just had it on the tip, Matthew Jacobs. It explores his connection to Doctor Who, his father's in the Gunfighters, I think, and his relationship with Doctor Who and what happened with the movie and stuff. Honestly, and you can buy it, get it in HMV, but really, really cheap as well. So it's a nice watch if you're a Doctor Who fan as well. So, and that explains a little bit more about the mythology about the TV movie and where they wanted to take it and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to know more about McGann and the TV movie and the behind the scenes stuff, go have a look at Doctor Who Am I.
I shouldn't say this. They say you shouldn't have a favourite, and you certainly shouldn't talk about them or admit that it's your favourite. But when we had Matt Jacobs on the show to talk about that, he was kind enough to come on and tell us all about it and gave us an exclusive and things like that. He was such great company. We had a real laugh. I'm going to have to invite Matthew back on at some point. The link to that will be in the show notes as well. But yeah, what a great show. What a blast from the past. Several blasts to various pasts, whether it was 2001 or 1996.
That's right.
God, yeah, I feel old, Charlotte, but I feel invigorated as well. Thank you for coming on.
No, I think this year we're going to have lots of time, and I think that's a very good thing, to explore Doctors again, to sort of rediscover certain parts of the lore and the stories that matter to us. And we've always said the fact that we've got 60 plus years, we are so lucky in this fandom that we've got all these treasures and all these things to go back to. So that's what this reminded me of, going back listening to Storm Warning.
Yeah, it's not just that which we can rewatch, but we can re-listen as well, Gary, or reread.
Well, you said, and you shocked me earlier on when you said that McGann has done close to 200. I know that I have not listened to anywhere near 200 McGann adventures. So there's a lot out there for me to start catching up on.
Well, yeah, better not hold you up any longer, Gary. Thanks for coming on, mate. Always good to catch up. Luke, you too. Thanks for making it, mate. Even if you've had somewhat of a crisis of temperature there, we do our best, don't we, in the United Kingdom when it gets to this time of year. We're never really sure how to play it, what to turn up and what to turn down, how many layers is too many layers. But we muddle through. Thank you, mate.
And I had a new Udi ready to go for tonight as well, but it was too hot, so I didn't get a chance to wear it. So maybe next time, look out! It's something quite special. Yes.
Always leave them wanting more, mate. Always leave them wanting more.
Yes.
And speaking of which, David Milling, thank you again. Thank you again, mate, for more morsels and memories from the deepest corners of your mind. Yeah, I think we had a very similar. I think we had a very similar 90s, you and I.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm 24 again. So I'm going to celebrate by listening to Zagreus whilst reading The Eight Doctors. It's been an absolute joy. I thank you so much for reuniting me with the wonderful, wonderful Storm Warning and talking about the wonderful Paul McGann. I've had a ball. Thank you.
Our pleasure. What next? Who next? Where next? That's for us to know. You to find out here at Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast where we always have the time. If you have the space, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Beep. For a change, I actually do know what's next as well.